Idea that Ben and I had long running. So my name is Christian Guerreri. I met some of you as you came in. I'm a senior front-end developer here, JavaScript mainly. Ben Hong, senior UI engineer. And so he's going to be speaking today. He's going to be going over a 101 on Vue.js. Ben really spearheaded this event. Honestly, he really made it happen. So looking forward to it. We're just really happy to have so many people here. So why VueDC? We didn't see anyone else had a meetup for VueDC specifically. Politico spent a lot of time, probably the past year or two, looking at different JavaScript frameworks, and we've really kind of narrowed down on Vue. We have used a few different ones for a few different products, but our best products, I think, were probably done in Vue. Do a little bit of native, a lot of native JavaScript as well. We're trying to trim down as much as possible, but Vue has been a really nice framework, really nice structure, and it's been really dependable for us. So we've kind of decided to use that in the future. We could easily have a talk, I think, on comparing some of the frameworks and why we've chosen Vue. So we've kind of started this group just to initiate the discussion, have meetups like this one where it's just introductory, to get people interested, but also more advanced topics obviously are going to be coming. So VueConf, just a few announcements, since we should, all meetups do the little announcements thing. So, VueConf US is coming up, highly recommend going. All the famous people are going to be there. It is in New Orleans in March. So there's a workshop day on March 26th, Monday, and then the conference is Tuesday and Wednesday, March 27 to 28. So last year they did the first official Vue conference. I don't know what makes it official. I guess Evan Yu was probably involved in that official title. But that was in Poland. And it's not here, but there was a YouTube channel that you can find. Hi, welcome. There's a YouTube channel that you can find that has all of the talks from that event. Highly recommend checking that out. So we hope to see you there. Ben and I will both definitely be there. We've already signed up. So the next meetup is going to be by me. It'll be more of a 201. It will sort of continue a lot of what Ben is going over today. And that's kind of how I like to see things going, especially in introductory phases. That'll be fun. So we hope you can all come back for that. Obviously, any interest in speaking, come to Ben and me. We're definitely interested in hearing your thoughts about any future meetups, any future talks, stuff that you guys are doing at your companies. If you need any help, crafting a presentation, just reach out to us at VueJSDC@gmail.com. Let's see. So, we are interested in getting sponsors. We want to make this a pretty big deal in the area. If you know of anybody who's willing to sponsor either venue or food or anything like that, again, reach out to Ben or myself. But today's gold sponsor is Politico, which is an easy win for us. So I'd like to introduce you to Rhea Harrigan. She is a talent acquisition manager at Politico.
Hi everyone. I'm so excited I get a whole slide. I'm not going to talk very much because I know you guys didn't come to hear me talk, and I don't always sound like this, so please bear with me. Start hacking up a lung, but I'm super excited that Politico Technology cares so much about technology that they wanted to start their own meetup, and it's really exciting to be a part of it from an HR and talent acquisition standpoint. I love being in recruiting and helping with tech recruiting because I get to live vicariously through people who do really cool stuff. Because I just talk all the time. That's basically what I do. But of course, I have to do the shameless plug about Politico, and I know a lot of people think Politico, they probably hire a lot of journalists, or I get like, oh, you work at Politico, or you a reporter, and I have to tell them, no, I'm in HR. But we also have a really awesome technology team, and I would love for you guys to think about maybe some career at Politico at some point down the line, or even just keeping in touch with me. I left out my business cards. Buy the pizza if you want to pick it up. Connect with me on LinkedIn. You definitely don't have to. The other thing is, if you guys are like putting this stuff on social, we'd love for you to tweet at us or tag us on social at Politico Careers, so we can throw you guys a retweet and keep talking about technology on our social. So with that said, that's all I got. Lovely to meet you all, and excited to hear more about this.
All right, so as Chris mentioned, my name is Ben Hong, and so today we are here to talk about Vue.js 101. For those of you that have your laptops out, if you follow this URL, you will get actually like live updates of the slides as I go through them, so that'll help you guys follow through. With that said, let's get started. So the first question obviously is, what is Vue.js? And the short and simple answer is that it's another client-side framework in the sort of the massive ecosystem that we already have. But it's special, and so in order to give a little context with that, we're going to kind of step back a little bit. And when client-side frameworks were starting to get really popular, this was around the time I started getting back into front-end development, there was this sort of issue of like, there are so many to choose from that before you knew it, there were sort of running jokes already about how often we were coming out with new tools or frameworks for JavaScript. And it kind of became a bear. But even in this sort of massive ecosystem, this guy named Evan You decides, he's going to build his own as well. So he originally worked at Google Creative Labs, and so had some work working with Meteor, working with Angular as well, and then after Angular 1 in particular. And after working with it for a while, he felt like, you know what, I can build something better, like most developers are. And so his brainchild is Vue.js, all by his little lonesome. And so there's this popular XKCD comic, with the fact that every time there's a problem, instead of trying to fix the original one, we come out with some new solution for it. But Vue.js is special in this regard, and I would say that it's an exception to this. And so obviously the question is, what makes it so special? And so to illustrate this, we're going to compare it to sort of the two behemoths in the client-side framework industry. So we have Angular. Particularly, we're going to talk about Angular 1 just because that's around the time that Vue came out. So obviously developed and maintained by Google. It was really easy to get something prototyped up and running really quickly. However, the problem was that a lot of it was like there was a lot of magical Angular syntax. So when it came down to actually debugging what was going on, it was a pretty high learning curve just to kind of get into the weeds of what was going on. Performance wasn't the best with Angular 1 at the time as well, and it was really opinionated on how you should build your app. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, even though I put it as a con. However, it does restrict teams as far as like opting out or opting into certain technologies, and so it's just something that Angular had that others didn't. As far as React goes, so obviously developed by Facebook and was recently granted the MIT license, which was a big win for the open source community. And it had great performance due to the proliferation of the virtual DOM. And so now most people nowadays know what that is because of React. And the other thing I liked a lot about React is that you got a lot better at vanilla JavaScript really quickly. Because unlike Angular, which provides you a lot of sort of magical commands to do things, you had to write everything, well, you had to write a lot of things from scratch when it came to React. On the other hand, the downside to this is that there was a really high learning curve as far as getting started. If you were not a JavaScript developer to start, it was a lot to deal with as far as like, oh, you have to configure Webpack, and then you have to do this bundler, and then, so yeah, it was kind of a rough start with React. And as well, as a result, this is really unfriendly to non-JavaScript developers, especially if people come from like the design world where they're HTML, CSS specialists and they want to kind of come in and help out. With the default templating language of JSX, it's just, you can't just paste regular markup into it. You have to like convert it into JavaScript-friendly syntax. And the other thing, especially in this earlier days, because there was such a high pace of development, you never knew when you upgraded your React whether or not certain dependencies or libraries were going to break as a result. So this, sort of like one of the things that was a cautionary tale as far as like when using and upgrading React. Now Vue, on the other hand, it has no corporate influence and completely open source. So the reason this is a pro is because Unlike Facebook, they had the parse developer platform at one point, and one day they decided to just close it down, and that hurt a lot of different people. Whereas, so with Vue, we know that it's open source and that we don't have to worry about a company deciding because it's in its own best interest that they're going to like shut it down. So that's just a nice pro about it. After I've worked a lot with React, a little bit with Angular, and as far as I can tell, it really does take the best of both worlds and brings them together. And a huge pro, because we have developers on our team that again are not JavaScript experts and in fact try to touch it as little as possible. So the fact that it doesn't alienate non-JavaScript developers is a huge plus for us as well, as I'll show you shortly. And as far as performance goes, it's pretty much on par, if not better than React, as some tests have shown. And almost most importantly, it's very flexible in accommodating how you prefer to build your apps. So for example, with Angular I/O, TypeScript is pretty much mandatory. Well, Vue doesn't force you to do that, but if you want to opt in, there is official support for TypeScript, and you have those options to pick from as you're going through your Vue app. And then of course we got to find a con somewhere, and so it does have a small core team in comparison and a smaller community. However, as far as the pace of development, I've seen them sort of build all the core modules and libraries at a pretty great pace. So with that said, I'm sure a lot of you are like, as a saying goes, show me, don't tell me. So let's go ahead and jump right into the essentials of Vue. So I'm going to open this CodePen right here. And OK, so actually, you know what? I'm going to use this one instead. So as you can see here, we have a flat HTML file. There's nothing fancy about it. Right here, you can see I've had a basic just Vue app configuration. So normally when you have like React and Angular, nowadays most people are used to this process where you have to install the command line tool and then you have to run Webpack and everything. Well, as the slide sort of, as I mentioned, it's really as easy as including jQuery. So we're going to go ahead and copy it. And just like you would normally, you just you have your script tag, and you paste your CDN. And now, once I attach the element hook, you can see here now that when I update the HTML syntax, that was it. So in like 2 lines of code, you see here we have a functional Vue app running. Granted, you'll want to eventually have Babel to transpile and everything, but as far as like getting something up and running, it's up and running. As you can see here, for those that aren't familiar with it, Vue does use the much-dash syntax kind of out of the box. You can certainly change it to other signifiers if you want, but as you can see, that was pretty simple to do. Okay, so for those of us that aren't as familiar with client-side frameworks, so what I did there is let's kind of take a step back and break it down. So the first thing we do is we initialize an instance, right? I'm declaring an app variable here and initializing Vue. Nothing too special. And so we're going to abstract it a little bit out for those that aren't as familiar with JavaScript, and we're going to pretend we're planning a trip. And so we have this new trip, and what we're going to do, we're going to map out all like the important details we want to do on this trip. So we want to go to Diagon Alley, and then within our luggage, we're going to carry these various things, and then when it comes to things to do, these are the things we want to do when it comes to our trip. And so the first thing we have to do with any good configuration is determining, as we said, the destination. And so in your configuration object, this is determined by EL, which stands for element. And it takes a CSS selector, which the best practice is to use an ID so that you only have one instance of your app running on any given page. Once you do that, then your luggage ultimately becomes your data object, and this is what we're going to reach into to reference as we as we work in our HTML template. And as far as our things to do, this is ultimately our methods block. This is going to sort of enable the app to do different things according to what we want as we define them. So instead of let's take a look at this in action. All right, great. So as you can see here, once again, I have very simple, again, just straight HTML, nothing special about this. And I've already included the Vue script here. And I've copied over the code that we had in the slide example. And so let's go ahead and start wiring some of this stuff up. So let's see. So we have our static name, So again, just using much less syntax. Okay, so something's not working, right? And so what's going on? 99% of the time, it's because you forgot to attach your app, which is what I didn't do. As you can see here, the element is Diagon Alley, and we don't have an element on here that has that. So once I attach that on, voila, now you have your data running. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and swap in the rest of the data here. All right, great. And then I'm going to go ahead and fill these. Yep, let me go back. So it's slides.com/bencodezen/VueJS 101, the essentials/live. We good? Okay. Let me jump back. Okay, here we are. Okay, you're welcome. So as we can see here, I'm going to go ahead and wire up a couple more things. So we have our wallet here, and we'll reference this. Okay. All right, so as you can see here, we have hooked up our basic Harry Potter World app with the data model here with Vue. All right, so before we can move on to the next stuff that's more interesting, we need to talk about directives. And so directives are the one part of Vue that is kind of magical. And for those of you that worked in Angular, it's going to be, you guys will know what I'm talking about. Ultimately, what they are Vue-specific methods that allow you to accomplish common goals that abstract away sort of the implementation piece. And so here you have a list of like sort of common directives that we have in Vue. The most popular ones and the ones we're going to cover are the ones on the left-hand side. And so as you can see, they're all prefixed with the V dash in order to ensure that it doesn't collide with anything else in your application. So starting with the VIF, else if, and VShow, these are directives that ultimately toggle the visibility of your elements. But there is one key distinction between them. The VIF and the VElseIf, they actually destroy the element on the page. And like they made sure all the event handlers and everything are eliminated, whereas VShow is really just a CSS toggle. And so to show you that real quick, we have our little parchment here. So I'm going to go ahead and actually let me queue up an element inspector. All right, so here is our parchment right here. And then, so if I do VIF and I just declare false, you will see that the element is completely gone from there. It's nowhere to be found. It's actually destroyed the DOM element, and there's nowhere. You're not able to reference it. On the other hand, if you use VShow false, you'll notice that okay, hold up. Let me do the true first. When you do the false, it actually just uses a CSS to toggle the hiding it. So actually, let me switch. As you can see here, style display none. And then again, just actually, I realized I was in another iframe when I showed you this earlier. So VElse on the other hand, VIF on the other hand, it's completely gone. And so those are the main differences between them. Usually, if you're going to toggle frequently as far as like visibility goes, then you're going to want VShow. Otherwise, VIF is the most common one you're going to be using for kind of removing and adding elements back into the DOM. There's this tweet I saw by Sam, who works at Google, and it says that 97% or 99% of software development in one requirement is that a user should be able to view a list of items. And so luckily, Vue has a directive for that, and that is v4. And as you can see here in this simple example, it takes what you would normally have to very tediously like write out by hand if you were sort of doing this right here, and it just condenses it all down into one simple block. And so like we did before, let's go ahead and show you the live example with this one right here. So let me go ahead. Yeah, sure.
So we if, we else, and we else if. So I understand the logic behind, but when we do use it, so it's already removing the element. So what's the we else?
So in the instance of, let's say you have, I don't know, 3 different banners, and you want the first one to show up in the event you have an error, but you want a default banner to show otherwise. So that could be a simple example just off the top of my head. Essentially, just you have a default element that you would normally show, and then you have your if condition to toggle it, depending
So
on.
then for the condition one, it would be the else.
Yes, that's right. So right, so you would have your if statement as we had before. So let me go ahead. Let me see if I can do this live. All right. So in this case, we have this parchment true, and let's see. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Okay, here it is. Okay. So as you can see here, I have 2 DOM elements here. Let me condense this down. Did that? Ooh, too much. Sorry, hang on a sec. Okay. So I have 2 DOM elements here. We have our v-if true, show this parchment, otherwise show the other parchment. So now if I toggle this to false, there it is. It's not styled properly, but you can see it right here. So that's essentially what's going on. And then you can have v-else-if to show, again, additional conditions, just like to continue that chain of logic, if you'd like.
So, okay, if I had a third one.
Yep, so in this
The
case,
third one I would say else.
yeah, so like, again, this is, I don't know, let's see, wallet.galleons is greater than 20. Else if parchment. Okay, so in this case, wallet galleons is not 20 because I set it at 12. So let me update that. So now you can see, now you have your, let me give this a color white so that it's, there you go. So you can see here, it went through the first v-if condition, which I declared it false immediately. Then went to check the second one to make sure if the wallet.galleons was greater, and since it was, then it showed this. And then in the event it's not, then it'll run all the way down to the final one.
So the order doesn't matter. So my if would be the last one.
Ideally, you want your v-if to be the first one, and then else-ifs all in the middle, and then your else at the very bottom. It's just like sort of like for legibility, it helps to kind of keep it in that order. Yep.
But I mean, from logical perspective, from framework perspective, it's not. I know, like, logically you should follow it because that's the standard. It makes sense. You should know. But if you switch them up, is it gonna
I believe it will break. We can test it right now. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it'll run. Yeah, it looks like it does have to be in a specific order. Yep. Any other questions? Sorry, yeah, always feel free to flag me in case you have a question. I get a little heads down sometimes. Okay, so let's go back. Right, we were talking about the v for loop. So here we have sort of our galleons, and so earlier you saw that what I did was I manually went in there to change the list itself. And again, for like 3 items, it's kind of not a big deal, but in the event this was, again, like a list of 100 items, this would get pretty unbearable pretty quickly. So let's go ahead and refactor this using the v4. So essentially, you put your v4 on the HTML element that you actually want to repeat. So we're going to v4, and we're going to declare, we want the, okay, so I have an object. So the syntax here is we have the amount, so you have your value, and your key, which is the label, and in wallet. So I'll explain this real quick what I'm doing in a second. Okay, so as you can see here, in my data object, I have this wallet object here. And so what I'm telling Vue to do is, let me just put numbers here, is I'm telling for every item in wallet, I want you to go ahead and output these labels. So again, we're going to use the wait, other way around. The mustache syntax, and that's it. Now you've sort of eliminated all that redundancy, and very clean, very semantic, and you know what's going on. Yeah.
So, question on that in terms of styling, like I know, excuse me, in the object galleons, it's all lowercase. What
Yep.
if you wanted that to be uppercase? How do you sort of apply that?
Yeah, so those are one of the advanced you can add filters, like custom filters for like highlighting, title casing. You could also, this is, so I wonder, between the handlebar syntax, it should be actually rendering the actual inline JavaScript. So you could write inline JavaScript in there if you wanted to like do that. But obviously, there are cleaner ways of doing that in Vue. Does that help? Okay.
But the is for like the computed methods, or is that too over?
Computed methods is different from data. Yeah, that's something that we'll get to in like the 201. But that has to do with sort of how data is being updated as like it moves through the life cycle. Yeah. But filters are just, again, in her case, you would do something like title case. And so label would pass through this filter that I built called title case. It would take the string and it would like make the first letter uppercase. Would be an example.
To build all the filters, or they're built-in?
There are some built-in ones, but most of the time you're going to be building your own, as far as I'm aware. So again, yeah, another popular one would be like, for example, this one would be like currency if you want to turn to like US dollars. That's another way of doing it. Okay, so let's see, I think we moved back a little bit. Okay, so now that we've covered v4, let's talk about vbind. So all this data manipulation is nice, but a lot of times what we need to do is actually update HTML attributes. And so Vue provides us a directive vbind. As you can see here, the long way of writing it is v-bind with a semicolon, and then whatever attribute you want, whether it's source, title, doesn't matter. I'll be using the shortcut way, and this is probably the way you're going to be seeing it most commonly in code bases, where you just prefix the attribute you want with the semicolon, and then after that, it's going to be rendering JavaScript. So to show you what I mean by that, so I've already defined in the CSS 3 different classes for the wallet. So you can see galleon, sickles, nuts, and they just get a color. Very simple.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, sure.
About that before. So in your model, right, you have label on the left and then the right is there in your actual data, right?
Yep, right here.
Right, so but here it doesn't care that down there it's reversed.
So this actually,
Binding by type, by data type?
so it's bound by actually JavaScript syntax. And so as far as just when you do a for loop, normally what you want to do is in an object normally it does like the value, but in case you want to include the key, then the key always comes second in that sort of like the standard JavaScript syntax, if I'm not mistaken. So that's the reason why it's amount label and not label amount, because normally you're looping through the value and not necessarily the key. Yep. Okay, so we were about to, we're going to show you vbind. So I want to attach a unique class to each of these LIs, but I don't, again, I want to do that in a dynamic way and not have to manually code it. So I'm going to go ahead and declare the vbind class, and I'm going to just, again, so the moment you attach the vbind, the stuff in between your string is actually going to be inline JavaScript. It's not actually parsing like a real string. So in this case, I'm going to use label that I referred to sort of in this loop. And as you can see here, immediately it applies the various classes that I want for it. Galleon, sickles, nuts, all there, all done. And so you can do this with, again, any HTML attribute, styles, and you can do some really cool things as far as dynamic updating, and we'll have some fun sort of code sandboxings for you guys to try later on. Any questions about vbind so far? Okay. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Finally, we have the vOn, and so in addition to manipulating data and your attributes, you obviously want to attach event handlers. And so you have your vOn, and then there's a bunch of your JavaScript events. And so the shorthand for this one, for v_on, is your @ symbol, and that's what we'll be using moving forward. And so I'm going to go back to the button here. And so for this, when the button is clicked, I want to attach this method fire confetti that I wrote down here. So on click fire confetti, and then I click it. Magic! Yay! And that's all there was to it. And so again, very clean, easy to read, easy to track. So right here, why did I lose it? Right here. So I did the @click fire confetti, and so this is something that I already sort of set up beforehand. So this is just like a JavaScript function that, again, creates the confetti. So that's v_on. And then let's see. I have one more. vModel. So this is Vue's pretty much single way of using two-way data binding. And obviously, as far as state management goes, for those that aren't familiar with it, single state flow is pretty much like unidirectional data flow is sort of the popular method now. But vModel does allow us to use two-way data binding if we need it. And so back to the button example, it's as simple as typing vModel equals and then the data attribute that you want to tie it to, and in this case it would be message. So now, sorry, do I have it twice? Oh, I left it in there when I was playing around with it. You're right. Okay, so yes. So the vModel here, as we can see, is now is showing in the placeholder, is actually showing the value of this is easy. And then when you update it with whatever you want, you can see it's just dynamically updating the data property on the page. So very simple, very powerful, and just good to know. So there are event buses and Vuex, which is essentially Vue's version of Redux. And that is a topic we'll get into in another time and date. Okay. So with that said, let's take a quick 5-minute break for anyone who needs to grab a drink or get something to eat. And then for those with laptops who want to try the final coding exercise, I'm gonna have some basic tasks for you to just sort of practice what we just went over. And then, yep. So we'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay. So I thought it's best to obviously give people some practice with what we're learning so you guys can actually reinforce what you're doing. So as far as the exercise, we have just like your basic, for those who watch Rick and Morty, basic Rick generator. This is the final product. As you can see here, I can go ahead and type whatever I want in this text input. It'll update the noun in here. And then in the event I want to copy an image link from somewhere, it'll also paste in. And then, so let's just do that real quick. Let's do strawberries. So let's take this one. And we're going to copy the image location. And then I can click and reposition his face. So that's, oh, sorry. There you go. So this is what we'll sort of be building sort of for the rest of the meetup. And so this is your starter pen. And your first task, we'll break it up into segments. And so go ahead and replace the pickle word with the actual, hook it up with the noun property that you see in data. And make sure that's wired up correctly so that you can dynamically update it in the text box, as I showed you earlier. And then also go ahead and wire up the background image. And so I'll give you guys a couple minutes to kind of take a look and see what you can do. And then I'll code along with you guys afterwards, so I won't, there will be too much of a lull. Okay, for those of you that keep working on your own, go ahead and keep going. I'm going to go ahead and start coding so everyone else who doesn't have a laptop can follow along. So our first task we have for this exercise is to replace pickle with a dynamic data property noun. So as we can see here, we have configured a new app. However, we have not hooked it up yet, so we're going to hook up the main div class with app ID. And then the next thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and write something in here, right? Let's just call it like cucumber. And the solution to this is we're going to use our mustache syntax, and we're going to write noun in here. And now we have dynamic property updating within our HTML template. Pretty straightforward. Task number 2 was to then hook up this input to dynamically update the noun property. So all we got to do is we got to find this input, and it's input noun right here. And this is so we're going to use two-way data binding for this one. So we use our V model, and we're going to attach it to our noun property. Now we can do Chick-fil-A, right? And finally, we wanted to tie in the background image. This is probably the trickier part. So let's go ahead and first define a background image, or I think actually in the exercise we call it image URL. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go, let's see, it is, okay. So the reason I put this inline, now granted, normally with most of your HTML code, you're not going to actually put your styles inline. The reason we're doing it in this case is because we're going to make use of the vbind property to make this dynamic. And so what we want to do here is we're going to, so this piece right here is the pickle. So we're going to go ahead and for now, just to make sure it works, we're going to paste it in here. And so now we have to rewrite this. And so the gotcha with dynamic styles, which I should have mentioned, is that it needs to be written in an object syntax. So this is where it's more like JavaScript styling. So your background image now has to be in this camel case. And then because it's trying to interpret the URL as a variable, you have to actually wrap it in a string. So this is a string, and we're going to add something to it shortly. And this is a string. That should, ooh, that's not good. Let's do this instead. Okay, so this looks a little convoluted, but I will show you what I'm doing in a second. That should. All right. Dun, 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 dun. Refresh. Dun, 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 dun. There's a URL plus. Oh, is there one more tick here? Yeah, you're probably right. Well, this is why I pre-built the solution just to reference it in case something went wrong. All right. Yeah, so this one's a little tricky. Yeah. Okay, there you go. Okay, so once again, let me one-line this so that it's easier for everyone to read. Okay. So as you can see here, we're using the vbind on the style, and once again, it's going to take in a JavaScript object as opposed to your normal like inline CSS where you have your normal casing. So we have our object right here that's marked here and here, and then we declare our CSS property we want to change, which is background image. And then once again, because URL we want it as a string and not as like to interpret as a variable, we have to wrap this in single quotations. And then we drop in our data object right here, an image URL, and then we close it off with the correct syntax with the string here, and then close it off with the object. And now we have connected the image URL to it. And then similar to the noun one, we are going to attach a V model to the background image, and we called it image URL. So once again, let's go ahead and give that a shot. If I paste in the strawberry URL, there you go. And that's how that works. So again, the most convoluted piece of this is the gotcha, which I failed to mention earlier. Again, when you're doing dynamic styling, it has to be a JavaScript CSS syntax, not straight CSS. It's straight CSS. Any questions about that so far? Okay, looks. Yep. Yep. I had an issue with that at one point, but it may be because of CodePen. Let's find out. I do like ES6 template literals. I guess actually, something's breaking. Doesn't like that. So this is possible transpiling issue. Possibly. So the other way we could do this, actually, if we wanted to make this even easier on ourselves, is we can call it background style. And let's declare it down here where we don't have to deal with that up there. So we have our, wait, what am I talking about? This is an object, that's good. This is, it's gonna work. I don't know why. So ES6 template literals do work in some cases. I think in this particular case, because of all the different mustache syntax and everything running around, it's a little bit on the complicated side. So I will make a note to come up with a demo that actually works with that and get back to you on that. But that's a great question. Great. Okay. Any other questions for this first exercise? All right. So going back, now we're going to move on to, we're going to use our directives and methods. Now we're going to practice doing that. And so in the final example that we have here, you're able to toggle the menu up here, make it hidden, and make it show. So you're welcome to use whatever directives you like to use to accomplish that, but that is your first task. And for those of you that are a little bit more gung-ho, then you can go ahead and try and write your own method that then allows you to dynamically update the position of his face depending on where you need it to be on the image. And it's going to be, as you can see here in just a preview of the solution, it's going to be a little bit tricky because you have to, we're going to be using a v-bind on your style and updating sort of the absolute position of it as well. So with that said, let me queue up the slides again, and I will leave I'll leave the JS piece up, so in case anyone wants a reference as they're trying to figure it out. If you have any questions, please let me or Guerrero know, and we'll be around. Yeah, maybe a little. You're right.
Yeah.
I hate. This is what happens when you have way too many like backtick, quote tick. Okay. Yep. Great.
Yeah.
That's an awesome find.
You had him.
Yeah, I had him too early.
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
Does it matter if it's a straight object or if you have to make it something that returns an object?
So as far as, yeah, that's a great question. As far as best practices go, you should turn it into a function so that it returns a new object every time as far as like state management goes. For the purpose of this exercise, you don't have to do that. It should just work out of the box if you refer to it as a plain object. But Evan did recently come out with standards. This is new for people who haven't checked out the docs. He has a style guide that actually came out, which is pretty great, and he essentially has these rule categories where he prioritizes certain things that you really should be doing in your Vue apps as best practices, and that's one of them. which is, gosh, where is it? Oh, yeah. So he said like he would prefer that we all use functions for data, but for the purpose of like illustrating sort of everything working, I kept it as a plain object just so. But yeah, correct. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely. Great question. All right. So let's again, for those working, feel free to continue on, and then I'm just gonna sort of start live coding from here. Okay, so sorry, I have the final one up, so I need to switch over to the start. Okay. So our first task was to toggle this piece, and since we're going to be toggling on and off pretty frequently, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the vShow directive. Again, you could have used vElse, vIf, that would have worked as well. So for the side menu here, which is the wrapper for this component right here, we'll do the vShow, and in this case, again, let's just make sure it works. vShow false, great. So we're going to do that. We're going to have a dynamic property to manage the state for that. And so we're going to call that, show side menu, and I'm going to call that true. I'm going to default that to true. And so just to make sure that works, we're going to then say, okay, show side menu. Hey, there you go, it works. So now we want to attach our event handler to the button in order to toggle that back and forth. So we're going to go look for that button, and that is right here, the toggle button. And let me do this on a single line so that's easy to read for everybody. Okay. So in this event, what we want to do, we want to listen for a click event, right? So at click, very simple. And so I'm going to show this the inline way, and then we'll refactor it back out. So the easiest way for us to do this is we're going to say, okay, show side menu, and we're going to make it equal to not show side menu. Oops. That should, there you go. Now you can toggle it back and forth. So this works okay for obviously shorter inline JavaScript that you don't need anything complicated for, but let's just say, for instance, this was like, a few lines of code that we need to refactor. So in this case, you would just declare your methods config, and so we're going to call this, toggle side menu. That's our function. And then we're going to go ahead and take this right here, drop it in, and then we're going to do toggle side menu, right? And this should work, right? Except it doesn't. Yes, that's right. It needs context, and we need this. So I'm going to do it like this time. Now we're good. So now we have toggled it on and off. And again, this would have worked just for kicks and giggles. The if, same deal. Again, since we're toggling on and off frequently, and we don't want to actually have to recreate everything all at once, we just want a visibility thing, vShow is the more appropriate one to use in this case. Okay, so we're going to spend, let's say, about 5 to 10 minutes sort of talking about the challenge, because there are a number of ways of doing this, and I just sort of thought I'd come up with a fun one. So in the final exercise, again, what we could do is we could click anywhere, and it would update the position of Rick's face. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and just kind of walk you through it, because it's live coding, it might complicate it a little bit. So ultimately what we're doing here is we're updating this template wrapper. And so I've absolutely positioned this whole thing, and I've declared the top and the left with the Y and X data properties. And then you have to attach the pixels just to give it dimensions so that it actually knows where to move. And then I'll explain why I define the width here in a second. So as far as what's going on, you'll see here that in the image wrapper here, we have a click, right? And this click calls the update position function. If you scroll down to update position, you'll see that what I do is I go ahead and I start by, well, okay. So when you do a click event and you declare a function on it, you get passed an event parameter as part of it. You don't have to use it, but in this case we do. And so ignoring these these top 2 lines, essentially, you'll see that I'm dynamically updating the x and y properties with your event.clientX and client y, and that's something you get for free when you when you click on something. So the client X tells you where your mouse is from the X and then Y, essentially. And then the reason why we have this piece right here as far as the wrapper width is because originally when I set this up, it anchors the div at the corner of it. So essentially, you'll notice that Rick's face is actually where my clicker is. And so in order to position my mouse there, I had to essentially do a little bit of math as far as like sort of fixing it based on the width of the div so that it actually clicks on it. Whereas like, just to show you, if I take these 2 things off, you'll notice now I'm at the corner, which is fine like for demo purposes, like, but I kind of wanted to figure that out. So that's why I have the wrapper width calculation here. And I just define the width inline on the HTML in order to access the property with style width. So, and that allows me to click, and then his face will be dead center on anywhere I click. Anyone have any questions about that? Okay, solid. Let's jump back to the slides. All right. So as you guys can see, there's a quote by Sarah Drasner that I really liked in her course, and she says, you know, Vue gives me what I want when I need it, and then it gets out of my way. And that's how I feel a lot when I work with Vue. I'm like, oh, I want to hide something. I'm like, okay, if this, all right, now moving on to something else. Well, we recently built an app in React Native, and so I can just tell you from personal experience, just the hassle of trying to go back and rewrite functions to either remap things or reduce things. It can be a bit much as far as management, and so Vue is it's really clean semantically, and you know, it's been great because of that. So you know, congrats to everybody. We've essentially walked through 3 Vue applications in little over an hour, and so you've gotten some practice as well. But of course, there's more. This is just the 101 bare minimum essentials for getting something up and running. As you can see here, as some of you actually pointed out, there are still a lot of things to talk about as far as computed properties, filters, props, mix-ins. I mean, there's just a whole slew of things that Vue also provides for you when you're building your single-page application. And in the future, we'll be having talks regarding these. In the 201, we'll be talking a bit about the concepts, and then we'll have workflow-specific talks to talk about, you know, app architecture, testing, managing styles, because obviously managing styles in JavaScript is a hotly discussed topic in our realm. So we'll have a talk about that, and of course, nowadays functional animation is the big deal. So Vue does a beautiful job as far as managing those animations, and so we will talk about that as well in the future. And so as far as a sneak peek at Vue.js 201, I wanted you guys to, or Guerreri had suggested very
we go by last names.
Sorry, that's right, Chris.
Probably like 5 Chris's in our group.
Yes.
So. You said Guerreri, that's my last name.
He suggested that we sort of show you guys. So whenever you work, let me zoom in. If you guys do open a Vue code base in the future, obviously people aren't working in just like a single HTML file and then like writing everything in there. That'd be impossible to manage, and it would just get out of hand really quick. So I just want to give you guys a sneak peek into 201 where we start talking about the like Vue template file. So you can see here, instead of like .html, .js, or .css, we have a .vue. And it's comprised of 3 blocks. And so just to make it a little easier, I'm going to open VS Code real quick just to show you guys. So it's simple. Oh, wait. Yeah, I got to up the font a lot. Okay. Scaffold. Okay. So it's comprised of, your Vue file is going to be comprised of 3 blocks whenever you're looking at it. Template, pretty straightforward. This is your HTML template. Basic rule of thumb at the moment, I don't think they've done this in Vue yet, but you can only it can only return a single element. You can't have 2 next to each other. I think React has already fixed this, but I don't think Vue has yet. And then obviously your script here is your basic JavaScript, as you're used to in your HTML. and this is your style block for writing your CSS. Some cool things about the style block, just to mention, is that you can actually define the type of language you'd like to use, and it'll actually, you might need to install a package or two, but generally speaking, it's very convenient to be able to just switch. If you're like, oh, I really like stylus, I'm just going to use stylus. You don't have to do anything special regarding that. And even cooler is that you can just add a scope to attribute to your style tags, and that will scope all your styles to that component, which is pretty cool. And we'll talk more about that in managing styles for Vue. Anyways, so yep. So this is like your basic app architecture that you can see here, and you can see that they've broken out into different components. So this is like the sneak peek. Here we've actually defined a component to use here, to-do list, and this will then essentially insert all the markup from in here. So it gets pretty interesting as far as component architecture goes. I mean, anyone working with modern day client frameworks are familiar with this, but it's just, you know, Vue has this as well. So with that said,
And so the idea is you fill out each of those three for each of your components, so that everything's sort of contained within the components.
yep, ideal. Yep, that allows you to scope things. For example, again, like a button component, you might want to scope the styles there instead of having this bloated CSS file. And so again, this is one of the reasons.
You might have a global style, and then you want this one to be this one component.
Right.
Style.
Yep. So it's nice from a performance standpoint, just to only give users what they need and not just like this gigantic CSS file. It's a great way
Or
of
if a feature is sunset or something, it's not like hanging out.
exactly
Right.
cluttering
right,
everything else.
That CSS is not loaded when it's not needed.
which is pretty great. And okay, as far as additional resources, the VueJS docs are done remarkably well. Evan Yu and his team have done a great job as far as just documenting and providing examples for what they do. And as I mentioned before, there's a style guide in case anybody missed it before. And so these are sort of essentially his like best practices recommendations for when you're writing a Vue app. So just something to keep in mind. It's in, as you can see, it's in beta, so this is pretty new. And then as far as people who like going through courses, Front End Masters has an Introduction to Vue course by Sarah Drasner, and she's awesome. And so I just went through that just kind of see what she taught, and definitely a great one to check out. And then for those who like sort of on demand, and you can like download them, Udemy is a great option as well. They have a bunch of Vue.js courses on there. The one by Maximilian is the one I first took, and that's kind of how I got into Vue. And but if you do go on Udemy, do not buy them full price. They always have coupon codes to make them like $10 from the original $200. So do not buy them at full price. And finally, there is a Vue.js Discord channel, so feel free to join that. It's totally free. With that said, oh, there's a footnote. So in case you want to check out Evan Yu's story. And yep, that's it.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep.